The world praises courage, but quietly punishes those who actually live it. Stay with me till the end, because the final lessons will completely change how you see fear, freedom, and the price of being true to yourself. Look around your life for a moment. How many decisions were made from truth? And how many were made from fear? Fear of being judged, fear of being misunderstood, fear of standing alone. You were not born afraid, you were trained to be careful. You were taught to fit in, not stand out, to survive, not to awaken. And today I want to talk to you about something uncomfortable, something most people admire in words, but avoid in action: courage. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet courage to live authentically, even when no one claps. This is a graduation moment, not from school, but from unconscious living. Let's begin the journey. Courage is never free, and this is the first truth that shakes people when they finally look at their lives honestly. Everyone celebrates courage in speeches, books, and quotes, but very few talk about its price. Because the moment you understand the price, you realize why most people secretly choose fear. Courage always asks for something in return. It doesn't ask politely. It doesn't negotiate. It demands. And what it demands is usually the very thing you are most attached to: comfort, certainty, approval, or belonging. From a young age, you are taught to believe that life rewards obedience. Do well, fit in, don't question too much, don't disrupt the order. Slowly, invisibly, you learn that safety feels better than truth. And over time, this conditioning becomes so deep that you stop recognizing it as fear. You call it practicality, you call it maturity, you call it responsibility, but deep down it is still fear. Fear of losing what you have, fear of stepping into the unknown, fear of standing alone with your own choices. Courage disrupts this entire structure. The moment you choose courage, something familiar must fall away. Maybe it's a job that no longer aligns with who you are. Maybe it's a relationship built on silence rather than honesty. Maybe it's an identity you've worn for years just to be accepted. Courage doesn't destroy these things violently. It simply exposes that they were never rooted in truth. And exposure always feels like loss before it feels like freedom. This is why people delay courage. They say, I'll do it later. Later, when things are more stable. Later, when I'm more confident. Later, when the timing feels right. But courage does not arrive when conditions are perfect. Courage arrives when staying the same becomes unbearable. And for many people, that moment never comes. Not because they are happy, but because they are numb enough to tolerate dissatisfaction. There is a silent cost to avoiding courage that no one warns you about. Each time you ignore your inner voice, you weaken your trust in yourself. Each time you choose safety over truth, you send a message inward that your deepest knowing does not matter. Over time, this creates a quiet emptiness. Life continues on the surface, work, conversations, routines, but something essential feels missing. People mistake this emptiness for laziness or depression, but it is often something else entirely, a life lived below one's own truth. Courage, on the other hand, feels heavy at first. It feels lonely. It feels like stepping off a familiar shore into deep water without knowing how far you'll have to swim. That's because courage removes illusions before it offers rewards. The illusion that everyone will understand you. The illusion that doing the right thing will always be supported. The illusion that growth is painless. Courage strips life down to what is real. And reality does not always feel comfortable. But here is the part most people miss. The price of courage is paid up front once. The cost of avoiding it is paid slowly, every day, paid in regret, paid in resentment, paid in the quiet ache of unrealized potential, paid in the constant question, what if I had tried? That question grows louder with time, and no amount of comfort can silence it forever. If you are feeling resistance while listening to this, stay with me. That resistance is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that something real is stirring inside you. The lessons ahead go even deeper, and they reveal why comfort feels so tempting, why loneliness appears on the path of truth, and why fear itself is not your enemy. Don't stop now. The next step uncovers something that quietly controls most lives without ever being questioned. Courage is not about becoming fearless. It is about deciding that your life is worth the risk of being fully lived. And once you see that clearly, you stop asking whether courage is expensive, because you finally understand how costly fear has been all along. Comfort is rarely questioned because it feels harmless. It doesn't arrive with danger or alarm. It arrives quietly, wrapping itself around your routines, your habits, your relationships, and your decisions. Comfort tells you that nothing is wrong, that this is good enough, that there is no need to disturb what already works. And this is why comfort becomes the most expensive prison a human being can ever live in. Not because it causes pain, but because it slowly removes aliveness while convincing you that you are safe. Most people don't stay stuck because life is unbearable. They stay stuck because it is tolerable. The job doesn't fulfill them, but it pays the bills. The relationship doesn't nourish them, but it feels familiar. The life they are living doesn't excite them, but it doesn't terrify them either. Comfort thrives in this middle space, not happy, not miserable, just numb enough to avoid change. And numbness is far more dangerous than pain, because pain pushes you to act, while numbness convinces you there is no urgency. Comfort teaches you to postpone your truth. It whispers, not now to speak honestly, not now to leave what no longer fits, not now to take the risk you keep dreaming about. And the tragedy is not that people never chase their dreams, it's that they convince themselves they don't really want them. They shrink their desires to match their comfort zone and then call it maturity. But deep inside, something resists this lie. Something restless keeps reminding you that life was not meant to feel this dull. The most subtle trap of comfort is that it disguises fear as logic. You say you're being realistic. You say you're being responsible. You say you're waiting for the right moment. But if you look closely, you'll notice that the right moment never arrives, because comfort always finds a reason to delay courage. There's always another obligation, another risk, another excuse. Comfort doesn't forbid growth, it simply keeps pushing it to tomorrow, and the longer you stay, the heavier the chains become, because comfort is addictive. Once you adjust to a certain level of ease, stepping out of it feels unbearable. The unknown begins to look dangerous, even when the known is slowly draining you. This is why people defend their comfort fiercely. They may complain about their lives, but when offered change, they resist it. Comfort has become their identity. Leaving it feels like losing themselves. What comfort really steals from you is not opportunity. It steals awareness. When life is too comfortable, you stop listening deeply. You stop questioning. You stop feeling the sharpness of existence. You move on autopilot, repeating days that look different on the calendar but feel identical in your soul. Years pass like this, and then one day, often much later, a moment of clarity strikes. Sometimes through loss, sometimes through failure, sometimes through exhaustion. And you realize you have been living in a beautifully decorated cage. Here is the hard truth. Comfort always charges interest. The longer you stay, the more it costs you to leave. The dreams that once felt alive begin to feel unrealistic. The courage that once flickered feels distant. And you begin to wonder if it's too late. This is not because it actually is too late, but because comfort has weakened your trust in yourself. It has trained you to believe that safety is more important than truth. If this is hitting close to home, don't turn away now. Stay with me. The lessons ahead reveal why stepping out of comfort often feels lonely, why people may not understand you, and why that loneliness is not a mistake, but a necessary passage. What you are feeling right now is not dissatisfaction with life. It is dissatisfaction with unconscious living. Comfort is not evil. It becomes dangerous only when it replaces growth. When comfort becomes your highest value, life slowly shrinks. But when growth becomes your value, comfort finds its rightful place as rest, not as a prison. And the moment you see this clearly, you stop asking how to be comfortable forever. You start asking how to be alive. Courage almost always begins in solitude. And this is the part no one prepares you for. People imagine courage as something heroic, something loud, something admired. But in reality, courage often starts as a quiet decision made when no one is watching, and sometimes when no one would understand, even if they were the moment you choose to live truthfully. You begin to step away from the familiar world of shared illusions. And that step, however small, creates distance. Not because you are better than others, but because you are no longer walking in the same direction. When you stop pretending, certain relationships begin to feel strained. Conversations that once flowed easily now feel shallow. You notice pauses, awkwardness, resistance, not because you changed into someone cruel or arrogant, but because you are no longer reinforcing the identities others expect you to play. This is deeply uncomfortable, not just for them, but for you. Humans are wired for belonging. From childhood, we learn that being accepted feels like survival. So when courage threatens belonging, the nervous system reacts as if you are in danger. This is why loneliness appears on the path of courage. It is not a punishment. It is a passage, a space between who you were and who you are becoming. Most people turn back at this point. They interpret loneliness as a sign that something has gone wrong. They rush back into old patterns, old roles, old versions of themselves just to feel connected again. But what they don't realize is that by doing so, they abandon the most important relationship of all, the relationship with their own truth. Loneliness, when chosen consciously, is not emptiness. It is clarity. It removes the noise of constant validation and forces you to hear your own voice. At first, this can feel unsettling. Without the familiar reflections of others, you may feel unsure of who you are. But slowly, something beautiful begins to happen. You start to feel your own presence more clearly. Your thoughts become sharper. Your values become clearer. You begin to sense what actually matters to you, not what you were conditioned to want. The fear of walking alone is one of the strongest forces keeping people from courage. It is easier to suffer together than to grow alone. It is easier to stay in a shared illusion than to face the discomfort of truth by yourself. But solitude on the path, the courage is not permanent. It is a preparation, a refinement. Life temporarily removes certain connections so that you can reconnect with yourself without interference. And here is the paradox. The people meant to walk with the truest version of you cannot find you until you become that version. When you live unconsciously, you attract relationships based on roles and expectations. When you live courageously, you attract relationships based on authenticity. But authenticity cannot be rushed. It must be lived into. And that requires time alone. If you are experiencing loneliness right now, stay with me. Do not rush to escape it. There is something it is trying to show you. Loneliness is often the first sign that you are no longer betraying yourself for the sake of belonging. It hurts because it breaks an old dependency, the dependency on external approval to feel whole. In solitude, you begin to realize something crucial. You were never meant to be supported by everyone. You were meant to be aligned with yourself. And alignment naturally reorganizes your life. Some people drift away, new ones eventually appear, but the deepest shift happens internally. You begin to feel rooted, less desperate, less reactive. You stop chasing connection and start radiating presence. This is why courage feels lonely before it feels liberating. The loneliness is the shedding of borrowed identities. It is the silence between chapters. And if you stay with it, if you don't retreat into old comforts, something extraordinary emerges. Inner companionship. A sense that you are not abandoned but becoming. Fear has been misunderstood for so long that most people spend their entire lives running from it, fighting it, or feeling ashamed of it. But fear is not your enemy. It never was. Fear is a signal, a threshold, a guardian standing at the edge of every meaningful transformation. If fear truly existed to stop you, it would appear randomly. But it doesn't. Fear appears precisely at the moments that matter most. When you are about to grow, speak truth, leave what is familiar, or step into the unknown. That alone should make you question its purpose. Think about it carefully. You don't feel deep fear when repeating the same routine. You don't feel intense fear when staying small. Fear awakens when you approach something real, something that threatens the old version of you. Fear is not protecting your life, it is protecting your identity. The identity that was built from habits, beliefs and stories you've carried for years. And when that identity is challenged, fear rises like a guard dog, barking loudly to scare you back into familiarity. Most people mistake this warning as danger. They assume fear means stop, but fear actually means pay attention. It means you are standing at a doorway. On one side is the known, predictable, safe, limited. On the other side is the unknown, uncertain, risky but alive. Fear exists to slow you down long enough to choose consciously, not to push you back unconsciously. This is why courageous people are not fearless. They feel fear deeply, sometimes more deeply than others. But instead of obeying it blindly, they learn to listen. They ask, what is this fear protecting? Often the answer is not safety, it is comfort, it is image, it is the approval of others. Fear warns you of loss, but it rarely tells you what you will gain. And what you gain through courage cannot be calculated by the mind because it belongs to the realm of inner expansion. Fear becomes destructive only when you let it control your decisions. When fear leads, life shrinks, choices narrow, possibilities fade. But when awareness leads and fear follows, fear transforms into energy, alertness, presence, a sharpened sense of now. Fear brings you fully into the moment because it strips away distraction. That is why your heart races. That is why your senses heighten. Fear is mobilizing you, not paralyzing you. Unless you resist it, the moment you stop fighting fear, something surprising happens. It softens, not immediately but gradually. You begin to see that fear does not want to be defeated. It wants to be acknowledged. It wants to be walked through, not around. And each time you walk through fear consciously, it loses a little of its power over you, not because it disappears, but because your trust in yourself grows. This is how inner strength is built, not by avoiding fear, but by meeting it with awareness. You stop asking, how do I get rid of fear? And start asking, what is fear asking of me? Often it is asking you to let go of an outdated version of yourself, to step into a wider life, to claim responsibility for your own direction. If you are feeling fear right now in your life, stay with me. Do not rush to escape it. The lessons ahead reveal something even deeper: why the world subtly discourages courage, why fear is rewarded socially, and why those who break free are often misunderstood. What you are experiencing is not a flaw in you. It is a sign that you are standing at the edge of something meaningful. Fear is not a wall, it is a gate, and the gate does not open by force, it opens by presence. When you stop running, stop resisting, and step forward with awareness, fear steps aside. Not completely, not forever, but enough for you to pass, and on the other side, you don't find perfection or certainty. You find something far more valuable: trust in yourself. The world does not openly tell you to be afraid, but it quietly rewards fear in countless ways. It praises obedience and calls it discipline. It praises silence and calls it humility. It praises conformity and calls it being realistic. And in doing so, it subtly teaches you that courage is dangerous, not because it is wrong, but because it is disruptive. A courageous individual does not move according to predictable patterns, and anything unpredictable cannot be easily controlled. Fearful people are easier to manage. When you fear losing approval, you adjust your voice. When you fear standing out, you soften your truth. When you fear consequences, you delay action. Systems, whether social, professional, or cultural, thrive on this hesitation. They don't need to press you forcefully if you are already policing yourself from the inside. This is the most efficient form of control, fear disguised as responsibility. Notice how often courage is labeled negatively. A person who speaks truth is called aggressive. A person who sets boundaries is called selfish. A person who refuses to follow an unfulfilling path is called unrealistic. These labels are not accidents. They are warnings to others: don't do this. Look what happens when you step out of line. And slowly, people learn that it is safer to stay quiet and to be authentic. But here is what few realize. The world does not actually fear your failure. It fears your independence. A person who knows themselves cannot be easily manipulated. A person who trusts their inner voice cannot be easily sold a false dream. A person who has tasted inner freedom is no longer motivated by fear-based rewards. That kind of person becomes difficult to predict, difficult to intimidate, and impossible to fully control. This is why courage often brings misunderstanding. When you choose a path that is true to you, people who have suppressed their own truth may feel threatened, not by your actions, but by what your actions reflect back to them. Your courage becomes a mirror, and not everyone wants to look into it, so they question you, they doubt you, they discourage you, often under the disguise of concern. And this is where many people give up, not because they are incapable of courage, but because they want to be understood. They want reassurance, they want validation. But courage is not validated by crowds. It is validated internally through alignment. The world may not clap when you choose truth, but something deeper responds: your own being. If this feels confronting, stay with me. The lessons ahead go even deeper, because once you see how fear is rewarded externally, you begin to understand why inner silence becomes essential, why you must learn to hear yourself clearly in a noisy world that constantly tells you who to be. The world benefits when you doubt yourself. Doubt keeps you dependent. Doubt keeps you seeking permission. Doubt keeps you comparing instead of creating. Courage breaks that cycle. And that is why it is quietly discouraged, not openly attacked, just subtly minimized. But understand this clearly. The world's resistance is not a sign that you are wrong. It is often a sign that you are no longer playing a familiar role. Growth always disrupts systems built on stagnation. Truth always disturbs comfort. And courage always challenges the unspoken rules. You were not born to fit neatly into expectations that suffocate your spirit. You were born to explore, to question, to live consciously. And the moment you stop, seeking permission to be yourself, something shifts. The world may not change immediately, but you do. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop shrinking your truth to avoid discomfort. You stop waiting for approval that was never meant to come. Courage cannot survive in constant noise. Noise of opinions, noise of expectations, noise of comparison, noise of who you are supposed to be and how fast you are supposed to become it. The modern world is loud, not just in sound, but in influence. Every moment, something is pulling your attention outward, asking you to react, to measure yourself, to explain yourself. And in that noise, your inner voice slowly becomes faint. This is why inner silence is not a luxury for the courageous. It is a necessity. When you live without inner silence, your decisions are borrowed. They are shaped by trends, by approval, by fear of falling behind. You may feel busy, productive, even successful, but something feels off, a subtle disconnection. That disconnection comes from living without listening. Courage requires listening deeply because truth does not shout, truth whispers. And if you are constantly distracted, you will never hear it. Inner silence is not about escaping the world. It is about creating space within yourself where the world does not dictate your worth. In silence, you begin to notice how often you compromise without realizing it. How often you say yes when your body says no. How often you chase things that don't align with your values. Silence brings awareness, and awareness changes everything. At first, silence can feel uncomfortable. Without distractions, you meet yourself, your doubts, your unfinished emotions, your unspoken desires. Many people avoid silence because it reveals too much. But what it reveals is not meant to punish you, it is meant to free you. You cannot act courageously if you don't know what you truly want. And you cannot know what you truly want if you never slow down enough to listen. In inner silence, fear loses some of its grip. Not because fear disappears, but because it is no longer amplified by external voices. You begin to distinguish between fear that comes from conditioning and fear that comes from genuine intuition. One weakens you, the other guides you. Silence helps you tell the difference. Courage without silence becomes reaction. Silence without courage becomes avoidance. But together they create conscious action. You don't rush, you don't freeze, you move with clarity. And when you move from clarity, even difficult decisions feel grounded. You may still face resistance, you may still feel uncertainty, but you are no longer confused. If this resonates, stay with me. The final lesson is the most confronting of all, because it reveals the ultimate cost of courage, not external loss, but internal death. The death of the false self you have been performing for years, and without understanding this, people mistake transformation for failure. Inner silence prepares you for that death. It loosens your attachment to image. It softens your dependence on approval. It reminds you that you are more than the roles you play. And when the moment comes to let go of who you thought you were, silence gives you the strength to surrender without panic. You don't need to retreat to a mountain or abandon your responsibilities to cultivate inner silence. You need moments of presence, moments of honesty, moments where you choose awareness over distraction. These moments accumulate, and slowly you begin to live from the inside out. The world will continue to be noisy. Opinions will continue to clash. Expectations will continue to pressure you. But when you are rooted in inner silence, none of that determines your direction. You act from truths, not reaction. From clarity, not fear. At the deepest level, courage is not about what you gain. It is about what you are willing to let die. This is the final cost, and it is the one most people sense but cannot name. Courage asks for the death of the false self, the version of you that was built to survive, to fit in, to be accepted, to avoid rejection. This self is not evil, it was necessary. It helped you navigate a world that rewarded obedience and punished authenticity. But what once protected you eventually imprisons you. And courage arrives when that prison becomes unbearable. The false self is made of layers, labels, roles, habits and stories you've been repeating for years. This is just how I am. I can change. People won't understand me. These statements feel true because they have been rehearsed so often, but they are not truths. They are coping strategies. The false self exists to keep you safe from pain, but in doing so, it keeps you distant from life. Courage dismantles this structure piece by piece, and that dismantling feels like death because identity is being removed. This is why transformation feels frightening even when it is desired. You are not afraid of change. You are afraid of disappearing. You are afraid that without your familiar identity you won't know who you are. But what actually disappears is not you, it is the mask. And masks resist removal because they mistake themselves for the face. When the false self begins to dissolve, confusion often arises. You may feel lost, directionless, empty. This is where many people panic and rebuild the old identity quickly just to regain a sense of control. But this in-between space is sacred. It is where the real self emerges, not as an idea, but as a felt presence, a quiet knowing, a grounded sense of being that does not need performance or validation. Courage in this phase is not loud, it is deeply vulnerable. It is the courage to not rush into definitions, to not immediately explain yourself, to not replace one mask with another. This kind of courage requires patience and trust. Trust that life knows how to meet you when you are authentic. Trust that you don't need to be fully formed to be worthy. The death of the false self also means releasing attachments, not just to people but to outcomes. You stop trying to control how your truth is received. You stop negotiating your authenticity to keep peace. You let relationships reorganize naturally. Some deepen, some dissolve. And while this can be painful, it is also honest. Nothing false can survive in the presence of truth. What rises in place of the false self is not perfection. It is alignment. You begin to act from inner authority rather than external permission. Decisions feel cleaner, simpler, not always easier, but clearer. You stop asking, will this be accepted, and start asking, is this true for me? That shift alone changes everything. If you have stayed with me until here, understand this. The cost of courage is real, but it is finite. The cost of avoiding it is endless. Living behind a mask requires constant effort, constant adjustment, constant fear of being exposed. Living authentically requires honesty, and honesty once practiced becomes natural. This is the graduation moment. Not into success, but into self-responsibility, into conscious living, into inner freedom. You don't emerge louder, you emerge truer. And that truth becomes your strength. Remember this always. Courage does not destroy you, it destroys what was never truly you. And when that falls away, life opens in ways fear could never allow. Live consciously, act courageously, and trust that the real you is worth the risk at the deepest level. Courage is not about achievement, recognition, or even transformation as the world defines it. It is about death. Not the physical kind, but a far more unsettling one. The death of who you thought you were. This is the cost that no one wants to talk about, because it cannot be romanticized. You can celebrate success, you can admire discipline, you can applaud confidence. But the death of the false self, that is silent, private, and terrifying. And yet, without it, no real life begins. From the moment you were young, you learned how to survive emotionally. You learned when to speak and when to stay quiet. You learned which parts of you were acceptable and which parts made others uncomfortable. Slowly, unconsciously, you edited yourself. You became strategic. You learned how to be liked, how to avoid rejection, how to earn approval. None of this was wrong. It was intelligent. It was necessary. The world does not teach you how to be authentic. It teaches you how to adapt. And so you adapted. You built a version of yourself that could function, belong, and move forward without too much resistance. That version became familiar, comfortable, predictable. Over time it felt like you. But it wasn't you. It was a construction. A mask worn so long that it fused with your face. And courage, real courage, arrives the moment you can no longer breathe behind that mask. When the performance becomes exhausting, when success feels hollow, when praise doesn't touch you anymore. When you realize that even though you are doing fine, something essential inside you is dying. The false self is subtle. It doesn't announce itself as false. It speaks in reasonable language. It says, this is just how life is. It says, don't be dramatic. It says, be grateful. Others have it worse. And while gratitude is sacred, the false self uses it as a weapon to silence truth. It confuses endurance with fulfillment. It confuses stability with aliveness. And most dangerously, it convinces you that wanting more depth, more meaning, more truth is selfish or unrealistic. Courage disrupts this illusion, and when it does, fear intensifies. Not because you are in danger, but because the false self is. The fear you feel when you begin to live truthfully is not fear of failure. It is fear of ego death, fear of losing identity, fear of not knowing who you are without the stories you've been telling yourself and others for years. This is why transformation feels like disintegration before it feels like freedom. When the false self begins to fall apart, there is often a phase of emptiness. People don't talk about this part enough. They jump straight from breakdown to breakthrough, as if nothing happens in between. But the in-between is real. It can feel like confusion, like drifting, like standing in a wide open space without direction or labels. The mind panics here. It wants structure. It wants certainty. It wants a new identity quickly, a new role, a new belief system, a new version to cling to. This is where many people retreat. They rebuild the old self because it is familiar, even if it is limiting. They return to old patterns, old relationships, old dreams that no longer resonate, not because they are right, but because they feel safe. But courage at this stage is not about pushing forward. It is about staying present in the unknown, allowing the old to die fully without rushing to replace it. The death of the false self is not dramatic. It does not happen in one moment. It happens gradually through 1,000 small acts of honesty. Each time you say no when you would have said yes to be liked, each time you speak your truth even when your voice shakes, each time you choose alignment over approval, each time you disappoint someone else instead of abandoning yourself. These moments don't look heroic. They often feel uncomfortable, awkward, lonely. But they are sacred. They are dismantling years of conditioning. As the false self weakens, something else begins to emerge. Not an image, not a role, but a presence, a grounded sense of being that does not need constant validation. You begin to feel solid in yourself, even when circumstances are uncertain. You stop trying to manage how you are perceived. You stop over-explaining. You stop justifying your choices to people who are not living your life, not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. This clarity changes the way you move through the world. Decisions become simpler, though not always easier. You may lose things, relationships, opportunities, identities that once defined you. And yes, there is grief in that. Real grief. Courage does not bypass grief, it walks through it. You grieve the life you almost lived. You grieve the years spent hiding. You grieve the version of yourself that tried so hard to be enough. And through that grief, compassion is born for yourself and for others who are still trapped in their own masks. One of the hardest parts of this journey is releasing the need to be understood. The false self survives on being seen a certain way. The real self does not. When you live from truth, misunderstanding becomes inevitable. People project their fears onto you. They question your choices. They may distance themselves. This hurts, but it also liberates. Because you realize that being misunderstood is far less painful than being unseen by yourself. Courage at this level is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek attention. It shows up as integrity, as congruence, as the ability to sit alone with your own thoughts without needing distraction, as the willingness to live without guarantees. You stop demanding that life makes sense before you participate in it. You participate fully, and meaning emerges from that participation. The most profound shift happens when you realize that you are not here to become someone. You are here to unbecome everything you are not. This is not a process of addition, but of subtraction. Letting go of beliefs that were never yours. Letting go of ambitions driven by comparison. Letting go of roles that suffocate your spirit. What remains is simple but powerful awareness, presence, and inner alignment. Living from this place does not mean life becomes easy, but it becomes real. You experience joy more deeply because you are no longer numb. You experience pain more honestly because you are no longer avoiding it. You experience connection more authentically because you are no longer performing. And slowly you begin to trust life, not because it is predictable, but because you are grounded enough to meet whatever comes. This is the real graduation. Not into success, status, or achievement, but into self-responsibility, into conscious living, into the courage to be exactly who you are, without apology and without armor. You stop asking life to give you permission. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You stop negotiating your truth for comfort. The cost of courage is the death of the false self. And yes, that death feels like losing everything at first. But what you gain is not something you can lose again. You gain yourself. And once you have that, no approval can define you, no rejection can destroy you, and no fear can control you. Remember this, courage does not ruin your life. It ruins the lie you are living. And when the lie collapses, what remains is not emptiness. It is freedom. A quiet, steady freedom that does not need to be proven. Live consciously, live truthfully, act even when fear is present. Because the real tragedy is not failing, it is never allowing yourself to fully exist. And when you finally choose courage, you will understand this timeless truth. The quality of your life is determined not by how safe you play it, but by how deeply you are willing to. Oh, be real. At the deepest level, courage is not about becoming stronger, louder, or more impressive in the eyes of the world. It is about becoming honest, honest enough to allow parts of you to die. Not the parts that are alive and real, but the parts that were constructed out of fear, survival, and conditioning. This is the part of courage that most people sense but rarely face, because it feels like stepping into nothingness. And yet, that nothingness is not emptiness. It is space. Space for something real to emerge. From childhood, you learned how to read the room before you learned how to read yourself. You learned what earned praise, what avoided punishment, what made you feel included. Slowly, you began shaping yourself accordingly. You adjusted your voice, your opinions, your dreams. You didn't call it pretending, you called it growing up. But over time, these adjustments stacked upon one another until the original impulse, the raw aliveness you were born with, became buried beneath layers of strategy. This is the false self. Not false because it is malicious, but false because it is reactive. It exists in response to the world rather than in alignment with your inner truth. It knows how to survive, but it doesn't know how to live. And courage enters your life the moment survival is no longer enough. When you realize that being functional, responsible, and acceptable does not automatically make life meaningful, letting the false self die feels terrifying because it has been your protector. It shielded you from rejection. It helped you avoid pain. It gave you a sense of control. So when courage begins to loosen its grip, the mind reacts with panic. You may feel lost, disoriented, unsure of who you are becoming. This is not regression, it is transition. Identity is dissolving before truth takes form. There is a period in this process where nothing feels solid. Old goals lose their pull. Old definitions stop making sense. People may ask you, "What are you doing?" and you may not have an answer. This is deeply uncomfortable in a world obsessed with certainty. But this discomfort is not failure, it is purification. Life is clearing space within you so something more aligned can arise. Many people rush through this stage. They grab onto new labels, new philosophies, new identities just to escape the unease. But real courage is patient. It allows not knowing. It allows silence. It allows confusion without forcing clarity prematurely. Because clarity that is forced is borrowed. Clarity that arises naturally is embodied. As the false self fades, you begin to notice subtle changes. You stop explaining yourself excessively. You stop performing emotions you don't feel. You stop seeking constant reassurance, not because you are detached or cold, but because you are grounded. You begin to trust your internal signals more than external noise. This trust is fragile at first, but with each aligned choice it strengthens. Relationships often shift during this phase. Some deepen, some dissolve, some feel strained. This is not because you have become difficult, but because authenticity disrupts dynamics built on roles. When you stop playing your part, others must either meet you in truth or retreat into comfort. Both outcomes are honest. Both are necessary. Grief is part of this journey. You grieve the time spent hiding. You grieve the opportunities missed while waiting for permission. You grieve the version of yourself that tried so hard to be enough. This grief is not weakness, it is integration. It is how you reclaim compassion for your past, while committing to a truer future. One of the most liberating realizations that emerges is this: you were never meant to be understood by everyone. The false self seeks universal acceptance. The real self seeks alignment. When you stop needing to be understood, you stop shrinking your truth. You allow life to respond to who you actually are, not who you are pretending to be. Courage does not make you fearless, it makes you sincere. You still feel fear, but fear no longer decides for you. You still face uncertainty, but uncertainty no longer paralyzes you. You move forward not because you are sure of the outcome, but because you are sure of yourself. And that certainty is quiet, not arrogant. Living from this place changes how you experience success and failure. Success no longer inflates you. Failure no longer destroys you. Both become information, not identity. You stop measuring your worth through external milestones and start measuring it through inner alignment. Did I act truthfully? Did I listen to myself? Did I abandon my values today, or did I honor them? This is where real freedom begins, not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be who you are. And that freedom carries responsibility. You can no longer blame circumstances, parents, systems, or timing. You see clearly that every moment offers a choice: to hide or to show up, to conform or to stand in truth. The cost of courage is real. It asks for your masks, your excuses, your old stories. It asks you to let go of who you thought you had to be. But what it gives in return is irreplaceable wholeness, a sense of inner coherence, a life that feels lived from the inside out. And when you look back, you realize something profound. Courage didn't destroy you, it revealed you. The real you was never created, it was uncovered. And once uncovered, it does not need to be defended. This is the path few choose, not because it is impossible, but because it is honest. And honesty demands presence. But if you are willing to pay this price, life stops feeling like something that happens to you. It becomes something you participate in consciously. Remember this truth and carry it with you. You do not become free by adding more to yourself. You become free by letting go of what you were never meant to carry. And remember this deeply, quietly, without rushing. Life was never asking you to be perfect. It was only asking you to be honest. Faith is not about controlling the future. Faith is the courage to walk forward even when the path is unclear, trusting that truth will support you when fear cannot. When you put your inner values first, when you choose awareness over approval, when you act from alignment instead of fear, life begins to meet you halfway, not loudly, not instantly, but faithfully. You don't need to wait for confidence. You don't need permission. You don't need guarantees. Take one honest step today. Speak one true word. Make one courageous choice. Because the moment you stop betraying yourself, the universe starts cooperating with you. And this is the truth that never changes. Happiness is not about having everything. It is about trusting life, honoring your inner truth, and having the courage to live it fully. Walk forward with faith, live consciously, and let your life become your message. Take a breath before these words land, not because they are heavy, but because they are sacred. At the deepest point of every human journey, beyond ambition, beyond fear, beyond success and failure, there is a simple invitation. Life keeps offering you again and again trust. Not blind belief, not borrowed faith, but lived trust, the kind that grows when you choose truth even when you are unsure where it will lead. Life was never demanding that you figure everything out. That pressure was never divine, it was cultural. Life does not rush you. Fear does. Sock. Piety does. Comparison does. But life itself moves with patience. And faith is learning to move at that pace while still taking courageous steps forward. Faith is not believing that nothing will go wrong. Faith is believing that even if things fall apart, you will not fall apart with them. This is where courage and faith meet. Not in certainty, but in surrender. Not in control, but in alignment. When you act from truth, something ancient awakens inside you. A quiet strength, a deep steadiness, a knowing that says, I may not know the outcome, but I know who I am while walking. You see, fear always asks for proof before action. Faith asks for action before proof. Fear says, wait until you feel ready. Faith says, you become ready by moving. And this is why so many lives feel paused. Not because people lack talent, intelligence, or opportunity, but because they are waiting for certainty in a universe designed around growth through trust. Look back at your own life honestly. The moments that shaped you most were never planned. The lessons that strengthened you most were never comfortable. The breakthroughs that freed you most were never predictable. And yet you survived them. More than that, you grew through them. That is not luck. That is evidence. Evidence that something greater than fear has always been supporting you, even when you didn't recognize it, even when you doubted yourself, even when you felt lost. Life carried you forward, not because you had answers, but because you kept showing up. Faith is remembering this when your mind forgets. It is trusting that the same force that has brought you this far has not abandoned you now. It is understanding that confusion is not a sign of failure. It is often a sign of transition. That uncertainty does not mean you are off track. It often means you are no longer living by old maps that were never meant to guide your future. When you live consciously, you begin to notice something subtle but profound. Life responds differently to you, not magically in the dramatic sense, but relationally. When you stop resisting who you are, resistance around you softens. When you stop betraying your inner truth, energy that was once blocked begins to flow. When you stop asking the world for permission, opportunities appear that were invisible before. This is not coincidence. This is alignment. Faith is alignment with the deeper intelligence of life. The intelligence that grows forests without instruction, that heals wounds without effort, that moves the sun without anxiety. You are part of that intelligence, not separate from it. And when you live against your truth, you feel friction. When you live with it even, challenges carry meaning. Faith does not remove struggle, it removes despair. Struggle with faith feels purposeful. Struggle without faith feels punishing. And the difference is not external, it is internal. When you act courageously, fear does not disappear, but it no longer defines you. When you act truthfully, doubt does not vanish, but it no longer paralyzes you. When you live consciously, pain does not end, but it no longer feels meaningless. This is what faith gives you. Not escape from life, but intimacy with it. You stop fighting reality. You stop resenting timing. You stop comparing your path to someone else's. You begin to walk your own road with dignity, even when it is quiet, even when it is misunderstood, even when it is slow. And here is the most important truth to remember. Life is not waiting for you to become fearless. It is waiting for you to become honest. One honest step today is worth more than 1,000 perfect plans tomorrow. One truthful decision now carries more power than years of hesitation. You do not need to overhaul your entire life overnight. You only need to stop lying to yourself about what you already know. You know where you have been compromising. You know where fear has been speaking louder than truth. You know where you have been waiting instead of living. Faith begins the moment you stop arguing with that knowing. It begins when you say, I don't know how this will turn out, but I know I cannot continue like this. It begins when you choose integrity over comfort, alignment over approval, meaning over safety, and slowly, quietly, something shifts. Your steps feel firmer, your breath feels deeper, your life feels more yours. This is not ego, this is embodiment. You were not created to live half present, half afraid, half alive. You were not born to shrink your truth to fit expectations that were never designed for your soul. You are not meant to postpone your life until conditions improve. Faith says, begin where you are, walk with what you have, trust what you know, and act not recklessly, not impulsively, but consciously. Let your actions be prayers. Let your choices be offerings. Let your life become an expression of trust. Because when you live this way, even ordinary moments become sacred. Even small decisions carry weight. Even setbacks teach wisdom. And even uncertainty becomes a companion rather than an enemy. One day when you look back on your life, you will not measure it by how safe you played it. You will measure it by how honestly you lived, by how deeply you listened, by how bravely you responded when life asked you to grow. And in that moment you will understand this final truth. Not as an idea, but as a lived experience. True success is not about controlling life. It is about trusting it enough to show up fully, walk forward with faith, live consciously, act courageously, and let the depth of your awareness become the legacy of your life.